Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday. It's probably going to throw you off. It's thrown me off a few times today. The fact that we're going to be talking about a Friday night game, where we, of course, usually package this as the Friday preview show. It's today the Thursday preview show for 1 week only. Norwich, of course, travel to St Mary's to face an informed Southampton team tomorrow night. No mean feat at all to go there and try and record 3 points. It's something that very few teams have managed this season. Norwich City hoping to do that to stay in touch with the teams around them, which I'm joined, of course, by my colleague Dave Freezer, which I suppose, Dave, is the place to start, really. Just a little reflection on some of the results last night, two of which probably went in Norwich City's favour, one of which definitely didn't. That's feels like a big win for Burnley. Feels like they've got some momentum when perhaps most were feeling that perhaps this was the season that they would succumb to the drop.
Yeah, I mean, Leeds, with their injuries, with no Phillips and no Bamford, then that's two massive hitters for them, isn't it? You know, that's like Pookie and Norman being out at the same time, I suppose, the equivalence, isn't it? But yeah, you look at that table, Watford at least have now played their game in hand, so have Leeds, but Burnley still got those two games in hand. So that's the big one, isn't it? But them and Newcastle have both woken up. Everton, we think will have enough to pull away, won't they? Although they lost 2-0 at Southampton last week, fittingly. But I'm sure I wasn't the only one saying this ahead of the Man City and Liverpool games. Even at that point, we knew, with all the games in hand, that dragging Brentford and Leeds, as it looked at that point, into it was going to be massive. And that's the end game now, isn't it? If Norwich are to have any chance, they have got to get enough wins on the board to drag those two into it, because maybe not Watford, but you're thinking one of Watford or Burnley certainly are probably going to have enough to get out of it. Watford have got Roy Hodgson in there. They will be better defensively. They have been before last night. But Leeds and Brentford are dropping like a stone. It doesn't change anything from Norwich's point of view. That's the thing you can always come back to in this situation, isn't it? That unless they get points on the board, unless they win games, it's irrelevant what anyone else does.
Yeah, and they've got an opportunity, of course, this week to set the tone maybe for the Premier League weekend. If they can go on Friday night and record a win against Southampton, you'd imagine a few of those teams that you've mentioned there will be feeling rather jittery ahead of their games across this Premier League weekend. This, of course, is the ground that Dean Smith it was his last game as Aston Villa manager, wasn't it, against Southampton, before he obviously got the sack and ended up as Norwich head coach. It feels like a long time ago now, that first game of his against Southampton.
After his trip to New York.
After his trip to New York in between, yeah. I mean, it was quite the 2 weeks for him, wasn't it? But, I mean, how much, and I kind of put this to him today, how much do you think Norwich can take from the fact that they've beaten Southampton already? If we're being honest, there's not many teams they can say that about this season at this moment in time. So is that something they can take real confidence sort of from ahead of tomorrow night's game?
Yeah, I'd have thought so, but I think Southampton have clearly kicked on since then, haven't they? You look at the run they're on, one defeat in the last 9 Premier League games. That includes wins over Tottenham, West Ham, Brentford, Everton, as we've already mentioned. So, and as Smith highlighted, a home draw with Manchester City, which we all know how difficult that is to get points against them, as we've seen at Carrow Road recently. So, Ralph Hasenhüttl has got a good reputation, hasn't he? And the fact that they kept being in the relegation mix has sort of perplexed quite a lot of people, because the style that they play, the players that they've got, it just generally doesn't feel like they're a struggling team, but they're never too far away from trouble. So, there's no, after you've played Manchester City and Liverpool in back-to-back games, there's no reason to fear anybody else in the league, frankly. Wherever Norwich were on Friday night, it can't get any more difficult. It's all about just trying to play in the same kind of way moving forward. Smith highlighted some really interesting stuff in terms of the counter-attack, didn't he? Was it exceptional, I think the word was he used about their counter-attacking at Liverpool. But you've got to keep the door shut and the back door shut. And when you look back on the highlights, it looks like they just panicked, doesn't it? That they lost their way. But when you were actually in the stadium and you felt the flow of the game, as I talked about a bit in our pod, it was almost like Klopp made that double substitution. He put his hand up in the air and said, right, come on, let's get this sorted. Not just to the players, but to the whole stadium. And then they just put their foot on the pedal, and Norwich could not deal with it. So one way or the other, Liverpool were going to win the game once they put the pedal to the floor. You would hope that Southampton won't be the same in terms of being able to just blow Norwich away. But We all know that the likes of Redmond, Breuer's doing brilliantly on loan from Chelsea. Elianusi is a good player who's a Norway teammate of Mateus Norman. Stuart Armstrong is quite a strange, underrated player, isn't he? James Ward-Prowse is probably going to end up at a top 4 club the way he's going, and has got that wonderful set piece threat, but they are not Liverpool. So if Norwich can show what they had showed moving forward in the first half, and when they got the lead at Anfield, then there's no reason not to travel with some heart. They won 1-0 at Wolves in the FA Cup recently. If you can win at Wolves, you can win at Southampton.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys obviously braced the 4 seasons that you had to go across to Liverpool. I was sat in my living room trying to be disconnected with the game, but I live with a couple of Norwich fans, so that wasn't really possible. So the TV was on, and as the score came in and it said Milo Rashica 1-0, you kind of think, oh, here we go. But obviously didn't quite transpire in that way. But I agreed, watched the game back, and I think they could take a lot from that performance, as Dean Smith said. And it is difficult because it kind of feels like after that positive momentum they built up, wins against Everton and Watford, as we mentioned, they then had to play the 2 best teams, not just in this country, but maybe even in the world at the moment. So that felt a little bit sticky for them, and maybe a little bit false for them. But it's going to be interesting to see how they do this Friday, essentially. I keep saying this weekend. It's not technically the weekend, depends how you categorize it. But I mean, this is a really important block of 3 games now, and I put that to Dean Smith this morning. He was keen to include the Liverpool 5th round tie. Not sure if I really subscribe to that, but certainly the 3 league games that Norwich have coming out, starting with Southampton. Of course, Brentford at home at Carrow Road next weekend feels absolutely seismic, but also Leeds away. That block of 3 games, Norwich need to be targeting 2 wins, don't they? Do you think that's fair in terms of where they are in the league table, and obviously to stand any chance maybe of survival? That would take them to 10 games left of the season or so?
Yeah, I think it's got to be a minimum 4 points from these 3 league games. Otherwise, with the way the fixtures work out, they could be cut adrift. It could be very difficult at that point. You would need that final 10 games would have to be really exceptional to get out of it then. I'd be very disappointed if they go down without a fight and aren't in the mix in some way, and we still got hope. But if it's even close to 2 years ago and the Project Restart period where we knew they were dead in the water for a long time, then we'll all be hugely disappointed, won't we? And obviously Dean Smith won't want that to happen at all, because he's going to need to continue building towards the Championship. But let's hope we don't have to continue down that road too much further, because we've all had that familiar tale far too many times following Norwich City, haven't we? So yeah, I think the Liverpool game for me, if you look at the team selection for tomorrow night, the goalkeeper selection, which I guess we'll come back to, Tim Krul or Angus Gunn, now that Tim's fit, that's the only real one for me where you think they'd come back in. Really, logically, probably makes more sense to start Tim at Liverpool on Wednesday, doesn't it? And sort of ease him back in. I just think with Krul, he's such a big influence and such an experienced player that I wonder if Smith might be tempted, if he's looking fit and ready to go, to get him straight back in there, which would be a real blow for Angus Gunn. But there's no room for sentiment in football, and this is crunch time. If Norwich get a win at Southampton tomorrow night, it's huge, absolutely huge. Whereas if you look at Kabak, Jolis, Yanulis, Rupp, Sorensen, none of us are expecting them to come into the starting lineup tomorrow night, are we? Because it's too big a game. The Liverpool game looks perfect for them, to get them all back on track, to give them all an opportunity to press their claims for the Brentford game. Because I see the Southampton game, I don't see this as a must win. I don't really like the phrase must win anyway, because every game is must win, isn't it? And as you get close to the end of the season, it goes up exponentially in terms of importance. But the Brentford game, there's no avoiding it, is there? That is a 6-pointer. That is a must-win game. If Norwich don't beat Brentford at Carrow Road, then they're not going to stay in the Premier League this season. There's just no hiding from it. So the Liverpool game offers a really good opportunity to make sure you're absolutely tip-top and fine-tuned, ready for the biggest game of the season, basically. So, yeah, it's really interestingly poised. We just got to hope that they can deal with the pressure, really.
Yeah, and a win on Friday would take the pressure slightly off those two games, Brentford and Leeds. And
Yeah.
Steve makes a brilliant point on YouTube, which he says if they win at Brentford and Leeds, that gap could really be closed with those teams. And they're two sides at the moment who perhaps look the most vulnerable. Certainly, you probably include Everton in that bracket as well. Newcastle look like they're going to get themselves out of it. Burnley always seem to, as we saw last night, string a result from somewhere. So this does feel like a fairly decisive run of games. How much would a win at Southampton, a side who have only lost once at St Mary's this season? They're on a wonderful run of form at the moment, 8 unbeaten in the Premier League, currently in 10th place. It did look at one stage like they could possibly be dragged into the relegation mix. So it just proves a little bit of consistency in a few results. Again, maybe even as Norwich showed a few weeks ago. And suddenly the season can flip and the outlook can flip. At the moment, everything around Southampton is extremely positive as Norwich travel there.
Yeah, as I sort of hinted at earlier, they were probably underperforming, weren't they, with the players that they've got at their disposal, and they've had was it yourself put the question to Dean Smith today about whether Southampton can be sort of a model club for Norwich, almost to strive towards what they've achieved. And he acknowledged that clearly that would be the case, but they have got a big head start on Norwich, haven't they? They're 5 or 6 seasons into a sustained period in the Premier League. They also have had very wealthy owners to build themselves up to that direction, haven't they? But let's not go down that cul-de-sac yet again, because we sort of know the answers, don't we? So yeah, that they're in a good place. But as you teed it up there, yeah, if they beat Brentford and Leeds but were to lose tomorrow night, then they're all good, aren't they? That would put them in a very strong position. There is still time to get it done, but with the Newcastle and Burnley home games to come and stuff like that, and they're going to need a shock result somewhere. Maybe Chelsea at home or something like that. Get a bit of revenge for the 7-0. But yeah, as I said earlier, it is crunch time. It's now when you find out how good these players actually are and whether that faith that they've placed in them in January in terms of not tearing things up and selling max so that they can bring in 3 players or something like that. They decided to keep it settled, didn't they? They said, no, we did our business in January. We've now got to put our faith in this group and rely on Smith and Shakespeare to get the best out of them. Well, this is crunch time. This is where we'll find out whether that faith has been misplaced or not. And of course, Stuart Webber lives by the sword, dies by the sword. That's his role. He will know that whether this period is successful or not is whether he's going to get a great deal of flack. Although, as I've said a few times, people should remember it's not just Stuart Webber. All of those transfers were made in conjunction with Daniel Farke. He was the head coach. That was done as a team. The head coach always gets a final say on those deals. That squad was built around what he wanted tactically and what he wanted the squad to look like at the start of the season. And ultimately, as we reflect on those 11 matches that he had in charge, it seems like he didn't learn the lessons from 2 years previously, did it? Because you look at the changes Dean Smith made straight away in terms of going more direct, in terms of taking fewer risks and stuff at the back. He has played much more survival football than Daniel Farke was playing.
Yes, absolutely. It's obviously been an improvement. I think everyone has seen that, haven't they? Norwich averaging, I think, about 1.1 points per game, which I think on the current rate probably isn't going to be enough to keep them up. It feels like they maybe need 4 or 5 wins, certainly to double their points tally in 13 games. It feels like a massive task, but certainly not an impossible one. And games like this are an opportunity for them to close that gap and to push some points a little bit north of where they need to be. Let's come back to that debate then around the goalkeepers with Tim Krul fit and available, which was always the case. He was always on course for this game. I think when Dean Smith spoke, he always kind of outlined it would be the end of February, that this Southampton game that maybe he would return to. I mean, park the goalkeeping debate for a moment. How massive a lift is that for Norwich City's squad? We know what a big character and influence he is on those. So much experience at this level as well. Given all we've spoken about the crunch period, the period that Norwich City are now entering, to have a character like that back feels like a massive boost.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's his influence. He is a big character in that squad. He is one of the leaders. And okay, maybe Angus, you could say the second and third goal on Saturday, maybe he panicked a little bit and maybe he could have kept a calmer head in it. But as I said earlier, I think Liverpool were going to win that game one way or the other, because they were just overwhelming Norwich at that point. And the defence obviously were in a bit of a mess as well, as Dean Smith talked about this morning. There were too many gaps in the back line, and that is exactly what he had been trying to avoid tactically, and what he felt they were doing better in the first half. So I just think initially I thought, he'll bring Tim in on Wednesday for the FA Cup game at Liverpool. That just makes sense. And ultimately, we can't judge it 100% because we're not seeing what Tim's like in training. We're not seeing if he's fully fit. But I think if Krul is even 95% fit, and he's really buzzing for the game, and he's desperate to be back in there, and he's, doing everything in training to push Dean Smith's mind in that direction, then I think, unfortunately, Angus may have to brace for bad news, because that is going to be a painful blow for him to not play at Southampton. He's going to be desperate to play in that game, isn't he? And prove them all wrong and keep a clean sheet and keep Krul out of the team. And he may still get that opportunity, and he will have to take that opportunity if he gets it, because he knows that Krul is back and breathing down his neck. And when he signed, he knew that basically Tim was the number one, and he would have to wait for his opportunities. So I can really see it being very, very tempting to Smith ahead of this game, just knowing, 200 Premier League appearances Tim Krul has got, and all right, he's only 15 caps, but a lot of international experience in terms of going away with Holland and going to tournaments and things like that. He is, if you spoke to people who don't support Norwich and the players that they're going to list, probably Billy Gilmore, obviously.
He's right at the top always.
Right at the top, number one player. Tim Krul, Teemu Pukki are probably the two who are going to feature very highly in Norwich fans' lists, aren't they? So I think I've swayed hour by hour on it already, and I'm really interested to see where Smith goes with it. But I think I might just be swaying towards Krul now. Where are you with it?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it will be Krul. I kind of cast my mind back to last weekend and thought about the situation with PLA Malou, who, whilst maybe on it's a different debate to Angus Gunn, but still has come in, done a fairly decent job by all accounts. But as soon as Gilmore and McLean were back available, that was the two that Smith went to. It feels to me like if Krul's fit and available, Krul will come in, I think. And probably rightly so on the evidence of some of his performances this season, which have been very good. And we know that Dean Smith likes to lean heavily on those kind of players that he puts in that leadership group. You would imagine Tim Krul would be firmly involved in that. And you just think, I think if you look at it as a back three with the two centre-backs, with Krul in goal, Hanley and Gibson, I think if you're Dean Smith, that's probably the three that you would want as Norwich City head coach at the moment. So, yeah, I think like you, I'm edging towards Tim Krul coming back, but I wouldn't be completely surprised if he stuck with Angus Gunn either. But with the game on Tuesday, it probably affords him a little bit more license to dip Angus out and then play him again on Tuesday, and then obviously you can make a decision ahead of Brentford next week. But it's going to be fascinating. Of course, the other bit of good news: Jacob Sorensen back in training as well for Norwich City, someone who was pretty influential in that 4-4-2 formation. Those two, one and a bit wins over Everton and Watford, because obviously he limped out with the Watford win. But his injury came at quite a disappointing time for him, because he got injured at the point where other midfield players were returning. Does it feel like he's still in a position to stake a claim, or do you think he's going to have to show a bit more patience to get back into Dean Smith's thoughts?
Yeah, I don't see Sorensen coming straight back in, and more from the tone that the way that Smith delivered the news on him and Rupp, it sounded more like they're back in training rather than back in contention. Because with Krul, he said clearly back in contention, didn't he? And said, I've got a decision to make. He didn't go into those terms with those two. So I think with Norman back, Sorensen probably doesn't get ahead of him full stop anyway, unless you're going to play two out-and-out defensive midfielders in a 4-2-3-1 or something like that against one of the big boys. I would struggle to see him getting ahead of Norman, because for me, he's pretty much Norwich's best player, and it's a huge, huge boost to have him back. And I thought there were some really encouraging signs from him at Anfield last week, as I wrote in the Player Watch piece on Pinkham Plus. And I should mention as well, I had a chat with Matthias Norman at last night's event at Carrow Road, which is the Norwich City fans social club. They were doing a Q&A, him and Sam Byram. Sounds like it went very well. It was all raising money for the Community Sports Foundation, wasn't it? So if you haven't checked that out yet, then Pinkham Plus, the video and the article is up there. There's more to come from that in the morning. But actually speaking to him, there's a real I think that's the first time I've interviewed him, and there's a real steeliness to him. There's a sort of no nonsense really, and maybe there's a little bit of language barrier in terms of sort of maybe slightly limited answers, but he seems like someone that takes that suffers no fools, which is a shame for him because he was having to speak to me. But he
I wasn't going to say
persevered.
it, Dave. I wasn't going to say it.
He persevered, and I just felt that there's a real determination. He comes across like a winner, and that's a big thing. I think a big thing in terms of attitude, and I guess Gilmour has that a little bit as well, but his boots have almost let him down a bit this season, haven't they? He'll probably be like that in the future. He's sort of got the attitude of a winner, isn't he? But he's maybe not quite got the footballing skills to make that translate into a relegation battle. But I think you're right as well. It is interesting with Gilmour that he's straight back in there and almost is not. Hopefully, or certainly. From my point of view, this has been the case for a while, but defensively, he doesn't do enough and it just doesn't come naturally to his game. And so often he's trading the wrong side of a player when they're getting into the Norwich box. But with the ball, if you can play him into form, he is someone that could, unpick the lock. He is someone that can deliver a good set piece. He is someone that potentially could get Norwich scoring more goals. And that is what is going to have to happen. I've got the table in front of me. Still 15 goals in 25 games. That rate has got to shoot up pretty dramatically if Norwich can stay up this season, if we're frank. So I think he'll persevere with Gilmour and just hope that that's what they can do, that they can get him into a run of form.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been the thing with Gilmour, isn't it? Neat and tidy in possession, but it's actually how does he impact things both going forward and going backwards? And maybe the conclusion that Daniel Farke reached was perhaps not enough of one. Hence why we didn't see too much of him towards the end of his reign. Dean Smith clearly does see value in what he can offer, and Norwich. To be fair, he came into the side last weekend. I'm not solely putting this down to him, of course, but they were much improved in possession. Obviously, Norman was as you say, a massive contributing factor to that as well. But that midfield setup, that free that he's kind of got of Norman, Gilmour, and McLean feels like the free that he wants to go with. I mean, we're kind of talking about maybe little areas as we did with kind of the two centre halves midfield free, and if Norwich can sustain that spine with obviously Teemu Pukki up front now, Adam Ida's out for the season, then it does feel like that is probably Smith's preference between now and obviously the end of the season. So it's going to be interesting to see if those players can step up in the way that Dean Smith would like to, given he's leaning on them so heavily. It's interesting you mentioned the lack of goals there, Dave. I asked Dean Smith this morning about Christos Solis. You can read his quotes on Pinken.com and obviously on the Pinken Plus app now as well. But some really interesting stuff, I thought, in terms of his admission and the fact that he felt that his price tag has maybe been weighing heavy on his shoulders a little bit, but also that there's a lack of confidence. But it didn't sound like Dean Smith's completely written him off as a player.
No, I thought it was quite encouraging to hear, really. That is what they've done. They've taken a step back, haven't they? And they've just had an honest chat with him and said, right, let's get you going again. You're playing the under-23s, you're playing the FA Cup. We'll build you back up. And rather than sort of pretending there isn't an issue there, they've embraced it. They've told him that they can see that he's struggling and that he needs a bit of support and things like that. And that's, what happens with young players sometimes. He obviously just hasn't made that adjustment and things haven't worked out as he hoped. And we all go back to that penalty incident against Liverpool in the League Cup, don't we? When Farke roasted him for taking the ball off Adam Ida, and really it feels a bit too obvious almost that was what was the turning point, but it did seem to have an impact on him, didn't it? He just didn't seem to be the same player afterwards, which seems a bit ridiculous. But it's not worked out for him at all. And the big thing from Smith's point of view, a bit following on from what I said earlier, is that Liverpool Cup game can really give an opportunity for people to press their claims for the Brentford match. And if Jolis could, find the confidence that he has shown for Greece and Pauk and the creativity, then Norwich could very much do with another attacking option being in there at the moment, because Pohet is trying his hardest and he's got the pace, which is a threat, but ultimately his technique isn't really Premier League level, is it? And Sargent maybe struggles for consistency a little bit. He's better on the right, but if something happens to Pukki, he'll be needed up front. So if Jolis could actually properly lay a claim down, it would be a really, really big help. And it would be a lovely moment for the lad if he could sort of be a spark in this run, because that's what Norwich need. All that we talked about, if they do it, if they pull this off, it's going to be a heck of a story, and it's going to be a heck of a success. If Dean Smith keeps Norwich up, he should be on the shortlist for Manager of the Year.
Yeah, I don't think there would be a better job this season, if I'm being completely honest, if Dean Smith managed to keep Norwich up. But it's interesting what you say there about the attack. I recommend anyone to go and check out Chris Sutton's column on Pink and Plus this week, which is on Milo Rashica, but maybe on Norwich's attack a bit more generally. And he made the point essentially that more players need to come to the fore, that maybe Norwich's attack is slightly lopsided in that it feels like there's such a threat on the left-hand side, but maybe they're not quite the same level on the right. Not Josh Sargent's fault. He's playing out of position, as we know. But if Schollis could, and we've seen Milo Rashica really gain confidence and kick on in the last few weeks, if Christos Solis could score at Anfield in that FA Cup game, that could be the spark, couldn't it? That could be lift-off in the weeks to come. It just needs a moment, it feels like, for him. And of course, we've seen him produce the quality before in the League Cup against Bournemouth. So we know there's talent there. Yeah, it just feels like it needs an opportunity and a moment to really kind of set him off, I suppose, and how Norwich could do with it right now.
Yeah, nice and easy. It's only Liverpool.
No problem.
Yeah, we'll see. But it, like I say, it would be very helpful for another attacker to join the party. The more options, the better for Dean Smith at the moment, because when you look at Sargent, for all the good things he's done, you look at that first goal. Yes, Max is to blame for the way he panicked and played Mane onside initially and sort of dropped behind the rest of the back line. But Sargent also doesn't track Tsimikas at all, does he? And that instinct is maybe where you're seeing a striker playing on the right wing almost, in that doesn't necessarily come naturally to him, because there's a few times he's struggled, but then it is against very good players. You know, Zinchenko as well against Manchester City wasn't great at tracking him a lot of the time, but it's a tough shift for a winger when you're up against the top side. So ultimately, what Rashica is able to do to sort of take on what Chris Sutton has said is that he can pin teams back, can't he? And he can be that threat. And maybe Sargent doesn't carry the ball in the same way, but they've almost used him as, it's almost reminded me a little bit of how Alex Neil used to use Bradley Johnson. You know, they would just use him as a focal point, as the target, and he would flick balls on and allow the other attackers to crack on with it. That's almost how they're using Sargent. So perhaps it's about, you know, your Gilmores and Normans and stuff getting close to Sargent to receive the second balls and things like that. But Smith's pretty switched on with all that sort of stuff, isn't he, in terms of that plan?
Yeah, I think we've seen more from the midfield in terms of supporting Teemu Pukki and supporting the attacking players a little bit more than we did under Daniel Farke, where there were points where Teemu Pukki looked so isolated. Even if in that win at Brentford, I recall him, there was a bit of probably the second half really, where he looked very isolated, and Norwich couldn't make anything stick. They couldn't get out of their own half, and they were probably clinging on for dear life a little bit towards the end. It does now feel like with Rashica, they've got an outlet, they've got someone who can get them up the pitch, and he did that fantastically well at Anfield. I thought that stat that Dean Smith listed today, was it 20 odd entries into the final third, I think shows how well they
28
did.
or 29, I think he said.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've clearly now got the ability to play in the way Dean Smith wants to, and I think we've seen that's with defence first and then going on the counter and trying to affect games that way. It's just about, I think, a little bit more output from midfield as well. Which just about kind of rounds off our discussion, really, Dave. We've been going for about half an hour. We like to keep these a bit short and snappy.
There was one question, actually.
Go on,
just cut across here from Andy J. Would we sign Norman even if we went down? I think it's very unlikely. You know,
not unless you start a crowdfunder. And if you get going now, then who knows?
If you can raise 11 million, or maybe just the 10, maybe Stuart will pay the one of it. But I struggle to see it because it's just too much of a risk. I mean, if you think about the history of Norwich and what they spent when they came down from 2016, and all the fuss that followed after that, McNally's exit and eventually Alex Neil, and all the financial stuff that Stuart Webber had to deal with, really. It was a massive churn, wasn't it, just to survive? Because then once they hadn't gone up and parachute payments had ended, the club just doesn't have the leeway to carry an £11 million player. I guess the only way they would do that would be you sign him just to sell him. But whether you can do that or not, I'm not 100% sure. There was was it Stoke did that with Benica Fobe a couple of years ago? They did something similar to that, didn't they? But I just don't think Norwich would have the finance to purchase someone for 11 million to take the risk. Because what if he breaks his leg in a car crash the next day after you've paid 11 million for him? From Norwich's point of view, that would be like apocalyptic levels for the finances. They would be in serious trouble. So, and the player has to agree to sign as well, doesn't he? If they go down, he doesn't really need Norwich, and he's probably almost certainly not going to play in the Championship. I think if Norwich go down, we will see him either in the Premier League or one of the other top 5 leagues.
Yeah, that was exactly the point I was going to make. I think if he's not a Premier League footballer next year with Norwich, I'd be very shocked if he's not a Premier League footballer or a footballer of a very good football team somewhere else next season, because I think we saw it in some of his early appearances. We sat in press boxes and people would be kind of, that lad in midfield with the silver hair looks pretty good for Norwich, and kind of making a note of his name, which you don't get too often with Norwich City players, certainly in the Premier League. Let's round off.
Good in the Bundesliga, wouldn't he? I think he'd be a star over there.
He would. Let's round off then, Dave. How do you see this one going tomorrow? It feels quite a tricky contest for Norwich City in the form that Southampton are in, but could you see Norwich City getting anything out of this game?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. I'd snap your hand off for a draw now, because I think that would be very helpful. And then as long as you win one of the 2 games that follow, then you're still alive, unless the results really, really go against you. That's not particularly optimistic. But yeah, I think the players will have a bit of pent-up frustration and energy and stuff from these 2 games, which will check their momentum. I don't think they'll fear Southampton at all. I think they will go for it. They are in the end game now, so they have got to start going for wins. They can't draw their way to survival, but I suppose they could technically. I don't know, 13 points probably might not be enough.
No, I don't think it would be. No.
So they can't draw their way to survival. They can't just keep clean sheets for 13 games. We know they're not going to do that anyway. I think they'll go and give it a good go. But as we know, Southampton have got some real good threats. Particularly that James Ward-Prowse set-piece threat. But Norwich have actually statistically been pretty good at defending set-pieces this season, haven't they? They haven't conceded many from corners and things like that. So I would think this is going to be another reasonably open game. I'll go for a 2-2 prediction, which I'll be very happy with. But I think it's one that could go either way quite easily.
I'm with you with the 2-2 and a draw. I just think that Southampton's quality, Norwich are going to struggle, I think, to keep them at bay for 90 minutes, but I think they will score. So, and that is the encouraging thing that we've seen in recent weeks. There's a feeling now that Norwich City are going to score a goal, which maybe we didn't feel certainly in that run after Christmas where there were a lot of injuries and whatnot. So,
a Pookie goal would be lovely, wouldn't it?
It would. It absolutely would. There you go. Thank you all very much for watching, Dave. Thank you for joining me. Of course, plenty more on Pink and Plus throughout this afternoon and tomorrow as well. We'll be at St Mary's for all your usual match coverage, analysis and reaction. It's going to be a good one. Whether you're watching at home or on TV, I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you again very soon.